All right, let's go ahead and get started. So we're starting obviously a little bit later because of the revisions to question 8, but I think that this is going to be something I implement a little bit more going forward. One of the things that I think that you should be thinking about as we're moving through these questions is answering not just the questions that I put in front of you, but also questions that come up when you're moving through this. And we're going to talk about that in question 4. But some of these should be very, very obvious. For example, we're talking about the NIST framework. What does NIST stand for? That should have been an immediate response right there. So that should have been a first question everybody asks. It's like NIST. What does NIST stand for? National Institute for Standards and Technology, by the way. Okay. So yeah, was that a question in the guide? No, but it's probably a good piece of information to know. So as we're going through these remaining assignments for the rest of the semester, if questions come up, I would encourage you to continue doing your own research on them. If I think some of the answers are not sufficient, then we may revisit this particular task again. I don't want you to think I'm not unhappy or anything. I just more along what I would like provide for guidance. And I think you'll see the value in what we're going to be doing here in just a second. I don't want you to think of this as me being punishing, because that was not the intention. It was more about revisiting something that I think required a little bit more emphasis. So let's go ahead and just go through the questions. We're going to stop at question 4 and talk a little bit about that. But these questions are pretty straightforward for the most part. Now, just for context, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity over the next few weeks. This is kind of the boring, the technical aspects of cybersecurity. We're going to talk about some more broad perspectives next week, and then we're going to have the target data breach in week 9, which hopefully will be sufficient coverage of the topic area. But this is kind of the standards and everything that's set up with respect to cybersecurity. And I had you visit the NIST cybersecurity site, and I said, what are the priorities for NIST with respect to cybersecurity? So let's just go ahead and I want to say I shuffled up the names, but actually all I did is just alphabetize my last name. So it's going to be Joe, your first up. What were the priority areas for NIST with respect to cybersecurity?
AI, cryptography, education, workforce, emerging technologies, human-centered cybersecurity, identity and access management, privacy, risk management, trusted networks and platforms.
Yeah. And so I think this is a pretty good list. Did anybody look at this list and just like, I can't believe this is on the list? Or did everybody kind of look at this and say, that makes sense? Did anybody look at this list and say, I don't know what these are? That's a more interesting question. So some of these are pretty straightforward. Artificial intelligence, I think, is probably, even though this is an alphabetical list, I think that's probably number 1 with a bullet right there. What about cryptography? Have you heard the term cryptography before? Can anybody give me a technical definition of cryptography? What's that like?
But it's like encrypting and hiding like information using different like methods of encryption and protection.
Good. Where is this most prominent in this day and age? Well, it's the internet, yeah, but more specifically, why is cryptography such a emerging issue? Because we've had cryptography for a few decades now. Why is it still on a list of priorities? What area of technology is cryptography very, very relevant to right now? Cryptocurrency. Hence the words crypto at the very beginning. You know, crypto or crypto assets, I should say more generally, cryptocurrency. So that's going to be something that we have to think about. We're going to save our discussion for cryptocurrency because we will talk a little bit about cryptography at a very general level, how its applications are used there. But I think good list, pretty straightforward. So then I had you bouncing over, and I gave you a lot of links in this one because there was a lot to absorb here. But we're just going to talk about this at a base or some of the basic levels. Applied Cybersecurity Division site has a list of current projects and programs related to cybersecurity. What topics are addressed by these programs? So Jake, what did your group come up with on this one?
So there were a bunch of different things: cybersecurity and privacy application, cybersecurity and Internet of Things, cybersecurity framework, national cybersecurity center of excellence, NIST privacy framework, and small business cybersecurity corner. Each one, main 2 topics covered were how to address cybersecurity risks within the organization and what frameworks to best use to combat those risks, as well as like using community and collaboration to create like an environment to where your employees like understand cybersecurity risks and issues, like how to best prepare for them.
Good. All right. So good list. Let's talk about the ones that are listed on the main page. So there's a few here that were in Jake's list that I want to focus on. We already talked about the privacy framework. That was something we discussed a little bit last week. Then we have the National Cybersecurity Center for Excellence, which is kind of a cool name. I don't know who came up with that name, but it does make you feel good about having strong cybersecurity. Then we have NICE. All right, what does NICE stand for?
National Initiative for Cybersecurity.
You are on top of that one right there. Good job. Yes, National Institute for Cybersecurity Education. Yeah. And so that's as it describes there, a partnership between government and academia and the private sector focused on cybersecurity education, training, and workforce development, which is kind of an interesting initiative, simply because there's very few interactions that occur between industry, government, and academia. Like usually it's going to be two of those possible parties that do partnerships, but it's very rare that you actually see a three-way initiative in that. So, and then we have the cybersecurity for IoT programs. IoT, I'm not going to ask you. Hopefully, you already know IoT is Internet of Things. Internet of Things, we're going to talk a little bit about next week as well. But those are devices that actually use the internet connectivities, but don't actually need internet connectivity. And so something that I think is kind of interesting. One of the more common ones now is um, HVAC units, AC and heating units that are in homes now have internet connectivity. I know my mother's does, that she can actually connect to the internet and control the temperature in her house, which I think that to some minor convenience that makes sense. Let's say that you want to control your heating and air conditioning bill, so you're going to be out of the house the entire day, and then you're heading home and you want, oh, I want it to be cool in the house when I arrive, so you can turn the AC on about 30 minutes before you arrive home and have that set up if it's not automatically set up. So there's a minor convenience to that, but as we're going to talk about next week, there's also some problems with that, because if they're Internet of Things, then basically these items can be compromised and can be set to abysmal different settings. So imagine that you've got your HVAC unit, your AC and heating unit on the Internet of Things. Somebody hacks that and drives the heater all the way up to 99 degrees. I'd be kind of like, all right, I'm moving right there. And it's I can't handle 99 degrees. That's just too much. That's why I moved north, is because I lived so many summers in Oklahoma and Texas, and that was basically like Dante's Inferno right there. Yeah, the hot parts of Dante's Inferno, not like the part where it's like freezing cold. I actually probably would have enjoyed that. But yeah. And then so I actually made the joke that I've got one device that has Internet of Things. I don't currently have it hooked up to the internet because I don't know why it is, but I've got an air filtration unit in my house, or my home. It's in my bedroom. That's got an internet connectivity. I'm just like, why does this need to be connected to the internet? I don't get it. And it's like, I'm a little bit concerned that if I do connect to the internet, it gets hacked. There's like a secret compartment with like a poisonous gas that will release, that they do that in standard and all models just for the hackers to be able to hack these devices. But yeah, so interesting aspects for the Internet of Things. All right, so leading into some bigger discussions we're going to have, I said, according to the CSF 2.0 guide, what are the 6 functional areas of the cybersecurity framework? We can kind of see the privacy framework right here, which we talked about last week, but what are the 6 functional areas of the cybersecurity framework? Meg. Right, so these items right here, and we're going to talk a little bit more in detail because we have some definitions for that, but that's kind of the guide that we're looking for right here, which is going to seem really familiar, and it seems kind of overlaps with other areas, but there's some interesting takeaways from this particular setup, this particular framework, that I don't think exist in other frameworks. And so we'll talk about that a little bit then. Now let's talk about our area that I want you to go in depth on. So I had directed you to this particular page, and I think most everybody did a good job of answering this question at a very general level, but I think that there was a lot to this, especially if you go into this guide and you notice that we've got a 42-page document that's volume 1, and then however many page documents volume 2. So question number 4, I said, so what are the challenges inherent trying to qualify cybersecurity programs, and does this initiative address those concerns? So let's address the easy question first. What are the challenges inherent in trying to quantify the value of cybersecurity programs? So, Tyler M., I gave you the easy question. All right. So I want this noted on my evaluations that I gave you the easy question this week. Okay. Now, if I give you a hard question in future weeks, you can go ahead and just cross that off. Okay. They cancel each other out.
That it's difficult to quantify the value because it doesn't like directly generate revenue, but
And you would have to measure the value, but like of the cost savings produced.
Yeah. So that's one of the problems that we've talked about with respect to just controls in general and anything that's not necessarily that's kind of qualitative in nature, subjective in how we approach it. It's really, really difficult to quantify. It's a little bit, and this is going back to discussions we've had in previous courses, the idea of preventive controls. It's like we can prevent problems from occurring. It's like, okay, how much is it going to cost? It's like, well, the cost is not relevant. What's relevant is the cost relevant to the savings. Okay, how much will it save? We don't know. All right. It's like, okay, how do you make me justify using or implementing this particular control if you can't provide some sort of quantification? Now, this is the key point. The key point is, does this initiative address those concerns? And a lot of groups said yes, but gave some very general observations. And I think the answer is the same answer that I always give you when you don't have a good accounting answer. What's always the two-word answer that we have in accounting? It depends, okay? What does it depend upon in this situation? It really depends upon the criteria that are provided in this particular framework. Now, there's a lot of areas in the standard that I should say framework, I meant standard. There's a lot of areas in the standard that we could have looked at, but I think one of the best areas to look at are the types of measures that are listed. And there are 4 different types of measures listed here. There's implementation, effectiveness, efficiency, and impact. So why are these relevant? And the answer is that these actually all measure different aspects of the types of protocols put into place. So it's basically 4 different dimensions is what we're looking at, the 4 different areas of effect. So let's go ahead and talk through each of these and see what if we can justify the inclusion and say that if we include all of these types of measures, that we do think that this would be a relevant way to approach this particular problem. So the first one is implementation measures. And if you'll notice in here, it talks about a yes/no question about systems. And it goes into a little bit more detail and says, talk about the design. So remember we talked about controls back in 417, and I said controls, we have 2 criteria that we have to consider. We have to consider both design and operating effectiveness. So this is the design dimension. Is something been put into place that addresses this problem? All right. So implementation by very definition is something been implemented. So that's pretty easy yes/no question. All right. That in by itself, if this was the only type of measure in here, could we say that this was an effective approach? No, not even remotely. Okay. Putting something into place. Okay. Have you fixed the problem? Yes, I did something. All right. We would probably want to know a little bit more about what you did, about the nature of it. By the way, that's kind of the answer that I give to Dr. Caden whenever she asks me about problems. It's like, did you fix the problem? I said, yes, I did something. I never give her specifics because then she'll ask me for more details. So I'm assuming she's just gonna say, well, he did something. That's all I care about. All right. But no, by itself, this is not going to be a sufficient approach. So we need to go into a little bit more detail. Next are going to be effectiveness measures. Now, effectiveness actually answers the second dimension. We talk about the first dimension being design. This is going to be answering the operation. Is the particular measure, the particular item that's been in place, does that actually can we measure that as being effective in its operation? So are we meeting the desired outcomes is the way to describe it. Now, if I were to say which is going to be more relevant in this particular capacity, is it going to be implementation or effectiveness? We probably want to know effectiveness. First of all, effectiveness actually assumes that there's going to be implementation in the first place. But secondly, that is more what we're trying to accomplish in our goal, is that something's effective. Now, something that Tyler said that's going to resonate is effectiveness by itself sufficient on its own. Like, could I fix a problem and still not want to have a particular security measure in place? Like, could I propose a solution to a problem? So yeah, let's think about this. This is going to be a very silly example, but say that I identify the problem that a meteorite could hit the Earth and wipe out all life. I said, okay, we're going to put a giant metal shield around the entire planet. Would that fix the problem? Okay, how practical is something like that? It would be very effective, but what's the problem with that particular solution? First of all, sunlight cannot hit the planet. We'd all die anyway. Okay, but ignoring that, assuming that was a transparent shield of some type, what would be the problem with that particular solution? How much resources would that require to put a giant metal shield around the entire planet? Literally more than we have on the planet Earth. Okay, literally more than we have on planet Earth. It's not practical from a cost perspective. So we do need to think about that aspect as well. That's something that Tyler alluded to. He said that we want to make sure that the value generated by the particular item, the value implemented by a particular particular area is going to actually is going to be worthwhile, and that's that cost versus benefit criteria that we've already talked about in other courses. So let's go ahead and move down the other one. So let's go ahead and go to impact first. I want to talk about impact, and then we're going to go move to efficiency, because I think efficiency is not an afterthought, but a different aspect. So if you looked at impact, what are the first two words in the bullet point here? It says cost savings. So what does cost savings imply? It implies that the benefit that's derived from the implementation of the particular item is going to be greater than the cost incurred by that item. So is that consistent with what we say that we need to also consider, the cost versus benefit analysis? Yes. And if you look down at the descriptions, they actually talk a lot about cost and business value, which is, again, going back to the IT governance aspect that we talked about at the very beginning of this course. IT governance is going to be paramount. Does a particular action or particular item have a positive value impact on the organization? Is it generating value for the organization? And that has to be true for information security protocols, controls, whatever you're going to assume this is in this area. This last one here, again, like I said, it's not an afterthought. It's the third one technically, but the one that we're like to talk about last is going to be the efficiency of items. So efficiency is going to be examining the timeliness of controls by determining the speed at which they give useful feedback. Can we consider that to be an aspect of cost? So we talked about direct cost here. We're talking about monetary cost down here. Can we talk about timing, or the timeliness of feedback to be an aspect of cost as well? Let me ask this a different way. If I give you information that's relevant to decision making, but I give it to you a year from now, is that going to be useful for you? So can we say that having timely information can provide more value than untimely information? Certainly, okay. So that's another aspect that we don't necessarily consider as a monetary perspective, but I think that we would pay more for timely information than we would for untimely information. A good example would be is if I could give you the definitive winner of the next Super Bowl right now, I think you'd find that more valuable than if I gave you the definitive winner of the next Super Bowl a year from now. Okay. Like, so yeah, one of those pieces of information, very easy to come by. I can tell you who won the last Super Bowl. I can't tell you who's going to win the current Super Bowl. You could make a lot of money if you had that piece of information, but unfortunately, we're not quite to the point where AI can look into the future just yet. So, all right. So overall, do these four aspects encompass this particular issue? So remember, does this initiative address the concerns that we're concerned about with respect to performance of information security? What do you think after looking over this? Is this a pretty good spread of information, a pretty good spread of measurement? Overall, I'd say yes. All right, I'd say yes. I would scrutinize this a little bit. I would say I don't know that some of these are actually true measurement items. I think that these are more calculations than they are measurements, and they're approximations of calculations. But that being said, overall, I think that this is probably a pretty good overview of what it is we try to accomplish. Which, again, if you think about it, these are all things that we're already familiar with, but we haven't necessarily categorized in a distinct order. So something to think about as we move forward. All right, question number 5. So I had you open the Cybersecurity Vitals fact sheet, and so I want you to look at the list of priorities. So they had a list of priorities here, and you can kind of see here. And it's a very basic question that I wanted to kind of cover. Jared, I'm going to leave this one to you. So on the cybersecurity fact sheets, how does this list compare to the one that you had to look at from question 1?
So the priority areas from the fact sheet were cryptography, enhanced risk risk management, practical solutions, Internet of Things, industrial control systems, and workforce education and training. And then there was a little bit of overlap between the answers in question 1. There was cryptography, education and training, and risk management, but then the other focus areas differed.
Okay. So there's a little bit of difference here, and is the difference negligible? For the most part, there are a few items that I think are in a list that are kind of interesting. Practical solutions, first of all, I think that one's one that they kind of throw in there for this is a catch-all for anything that we might have missed. And I don't know that one's provide a very good explanation, but I do think that this industrial control systems is fascinating. So we talk about controls. And remember, we talked about the control frameworks back in AIS, and we talked about it back in auditing. We said there are 3 objectives of controls. Remember, financial reporting, compliance, and operations. So we focus very heavily on these controls that have relevance to reporting, but does that mean that those are the only controls that are relevant to an organization? No. We could have controls that are in place that have no relevance at all in a financial statement audit, but are still really important to the functioning of an organization. Compliance, I think, is pretty obvious. You've got to meet the rules of the organization or the rules of the industry that you're operating in. But what about operation? So operations are going to be really, really critical for the good functioning of the organization. If they don't have good controls in place, then there's going to be a lot of problems that exist. For example, imagine that you're on a construction site. What are one of the things you have to put on your head? Hard hat, okay, hard hat. So is that a control? Well, we know that controls are responses to risk. What is one of the risks that you face in a construction site? Injury from physical danger. So we want to make sure that we protect probably the most important part of our body, which is going to be our brain, which is why the hard hat, okay? Plus, they're just really cool. They look cool, okay? So yeah, we can actually say that that's an example of control, but it's an operational control, not a financial control. Now, here's an interesting part. If we go back, say, 50 years, how much integration will we say there was between accounting information systems and financial controls? Can we say that there was still integration at the time? We know that information systems still existed, albeit they weren't computerized necessarily, but there's integration. So those are naturally integrated, the information systems and financial controls. How much integration is there between operational controls and information systems? So do we think that information systems care about whether people are wearing hard hats? Probably not, okay? Probably not this much integration. Do we think that's likely to continue? To some degree, yes, okay? I don't know that the information system is going to track hard hat usage. Then again, that might be a metric that could be relevant to operations. So as we start getting more and more integration of systems and sites, that would be something that I think that we're going to see increasing prominence, is the integration of operations and information systems. So basically what this is saying is the controls that we have in place within the organization itself, the operational controls, these are becoming increasingly more prominent, especially as we become better able to measure those and monitor those. So before, it was the foreman supervisor, if he saw somebody not wearing a hard hat, said, put your hat on. Now it's to the days where we can actually track hard hat usage. Maybe there's a monitor or a ship and can monitor when it's on and when it's off. So something that's really, and I don't know why I particularly picked the hard hat usage. There's any industry could be applicable in that regard, but operational controls are going to be increasingly more prominent from an information systems perspective. All right, so moving on. While intended to represent a list of cybersecurity priorities for NIST, the fact that the seat in question 4 was published in November 21st, 2021. Okay, so this is 4 years old, all right? Which 4 years, by the way, is not that much to me, okay? That's less than 10% of my life. For you all, that was basically before you started college or right when you're starting college, depending on your situation. So are these any of these topics that are listed here? Or sorry, the fact sheet, I'm sorry. That's a question. I don't know why I said question 4. I don't know why I said question 4. I'm losing my mind. I'm losing my mind. I meant question 5. Sorry, my apologies. Actually, did I say question 5 in there? I'm looking at an old version of this. My apologies. Does it say question 5 on your list? Yes. Okay, good. I updated that for this course, but I didn't update it in previous courses. So the ones that are listed in question 5. So let's consider both this and this area right over here. Okay, both of these. So are there any topics that are more of a priority now than they were 4 years ago? What do you think, Joe?
I think the cryptography and industrial control systems are more of a priority, as there's more data being used that needs to be secured. And just like more data people want to see. And also with the new technology coming out, I believe the education of the workforce needs to be updated, so no like data security risks are taking place if people are using those technologies like incorrectly.
And technically speaking, it wasn't part of the item, but I think we can also make an argument that artificial intelligence is going to be there. That was not on the fact sheet, but probably would be on a fact sheet if it was updated, if we were going to be including that, because that's become obviously increasingly prominent over the past few years. But yeah, in general, we can identify some ones that are increasing concerns, and I think the ones that Joe identified were very relevant. But here's an interesting question. Are there any that we would say have less prominence or less a priority than they were before? Jake, what do you think?
Because all of these topics now are more than ever about technology rapidly advancing or data usage, which lead to just more privacy risk. firms, and organizations have to be even more on top of their risk management policies.
So let me just confirm, you have the audacity to tell your instructor no.
In this case, yes.
Okay, I would agree with that. Okay, I would agree it's very, very unlikely that any of these become less of a priority, but some of them might become more of a priority over time. So I think it's a good all-encompassing list, and none of them have just really become obsolete in this particular context. All right, so I want you to briefly define this list here. I'm not going to spend some time going through these because if you go into here, it actually provides a definition for each of these in a little bit more detail. So it talks about what govern and identify, protect and detect, and respond and recover are in the list. I do want to talk a little bit about this. So this does have a lot of overlap with other frameworks that we've already talked about. There should be some, you should be screaming COSO, and you also should be screaming NIST privacy, because we're going to talk about that before. But is there some very, very direct correlations? Yes. If I were to say governing, what would that term for that be if we were talking about the COSO control framework? What's the very beginning of the COSO internal control framework? Control environment, yes. Okay, the tone at the top and everything is established. Identification, can we say that probably aligns with risk assessment? Yes. And then here's an interesting one. We have protect, detect, respond, and recover. Now, have we heard terminology that's very similar to that before? Yes, we have, but it doesn't necessarily align closely with the COSO framework. Let's think back. There's a couple of aspects of internal controls internal controls are designed to do something, okay? So remember I told you that some controls are designed to prevent issues from ever occurring. Some controls are designed to do what? They don't prevent, but they detect and correct, okay? So protection sure sounds like a prevention mechanism. It's like a hard hat is going to prevent you from getting a brain trauma. It's going to make sure that something falls on your head, that you're okay, all right? And then detection obviously is going to be like a detective control. Respond and recovery, those sure sound like corrective controls to me. So these kind of overlap in not necessarily the COSO framework, but areas that we've already got established some familiarity with controls and security measures already. So there's one that I wanted to know. There's one question that I asked, and this is question number 7. So if you look at this guide, we've got all 6 of these listed here, but one of these seems to be separate from the others, because you got all 5 of these now that ring, and you got this one right here in the middle. So obviously govern is separate from the others, but is it appropriate that govern should be separate from the others? Meg, what does your group say on this one?
Like it decides like the scope and the level of the detail.
Good.
And all of the aspects.
Good. So how do we establish that governance? What was the analogy I said to the COSO framework? Which aspect of the COSO framework it is? Is it control environment? Yeah, control environment. What was the very first thing we talked about in control environment when we learned about it in the AIS? Because everybody was in AIS with me in this class. I get to say that now. All right. And what did I say about control environment? Is it the most or least important of all the controls, or the control components? The most. If you don't have a control environment, you don't have a framework. All right. Can the same thing be said here? Do we have a framework if we don't have a governance mechanism? Now, if we do not have effective oversight of the establishment of policies, then it doesn't really matter how effective everything else is. We don't have a framework because nothing's going to be implemented or established before. So the same holds true for oversight in this particular area, in this particular framework, as it does for the COSO framework. That's the easy way to think about it. All right, last question. So compare the CFS functional areas to the 5 functions in this privacy framework. So I have this image that I found from the internet. I will say this is incomplete because it says in this CSF 5 domains. How many how many in the cybersecurity framework? How many domains are there? There's 6. What's missing in this diagram? The govern, which should be on the internal circle, but for some reason they just not include that, and they said government's a given. Govern is a given, but we know that. All right, and then we have our privacy frameworks with all these and listed with letter P on there. Okay, so we do have the completion there. This is an interesting perspective. So if we compare this, which are the commons to these frameworks? So the common one should be pretty obvious. All right, protect is definitely listed as a common item, and we have identify listed as a common item, and that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. So does that mean communication is irrelevant to the cybersecurity framework? Probably not, but it probably is given there. I guess we can also say govern as a common item because govern should be in here. But govern, identify, and protect. Control is a little interesting in the fact that control is kind of a given of the other pieces of the NIST CSF framework. So protection, detection, recovery, response, or response and recovery. Those are all aspects of controls that we've talked about before. They're just dissected a little bit more. But this leads to an interesting point. Why do we have protect here and protect here, but not detect, respond, and recover over here in the privacy framework? So quick question, okay? What did we say protect relates to with respect to controls? What was our analogy with respect to controls? Prevention, okay? Would you say a primary objective of the privacy framework is prevention of sharing of privileged information? Or is it prevention and then detection and correction? If the information's been compromised, then that's pretty much it. Okay. You do not want anything to happen at first. Now, can there be remediation? Sure. They contact you and say, all right, we're going to give you 2 years of security monitoring to make sure we don't screw up, but your information's already out there. It's been compromised at first. So prevention has to be a primary goal, a primary concern if we're talking about this. So that's one thing why I think protect is listed in both, but we don't have detect, response, and recover listed in both. So again, govern, identify, protect, common to those. A little bit of nuance with control and communicate. I think control could include the other aspects, but control is more general in this perspective. And I think the ultimate takeaway of this is if we think about the NIST privacy framework, there's going to be a bigger emphasis on the prevention of the compromise of information. Whereas we think about cybersecurity framework, cybersecurity is more holistic. It actually covers both the prevention of compromise and then the eventual correction and detection correction should problems occur. And we know from all of our discussion in this area that this is probably going to be likely a little bit more general in scope, simply because we as human beings cannot be perfect all the time. So prevention is not going to be an all-encompassing solution. So yeah, that's kind of the final final I'm going to talk about, but the general takeaway that I wanted to come up with. All right, we're done for today. We've got Alteryx on Friday. Your Excel assignment is due on Friday as well. I'll see you then.